Welcome to another edition of the MSDW podcast. I'm your host, Jason Gumpert, editor of MSDynamicsWorld.com. My guest today is Elliot Fishman. Elliot is CEO of Catapult ERP, a Vancouver, BC-based firm specializing in the deployment of ERP and CRM solutions, including Dynamics CRM, Dynamics NAV, and 365. Catapult just released a new ebook on future-proofing Dynamics NAV, including topics like upgrades, managing cumulative updates, and investing in routine maintenance. Elliot also just wrote a related article for MSDW all about the advantages of cumulative updates for NAV. Hey, Elliot, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Jason. Thanks. Good to be here.
Yeah, good to have you. So Catapult has just released a new ebook on future-proofing Dynamics NAV, and it's a topic where there really is a lot to talk about, a lot of changes and as the product's evolved over the last few years. I thought maybe we could start by just having you talk a little bit about how did we get to where we are with cumulative updates in NAV 2016, NAV 2017, and maybe you could give a brief history of sort of what it took the product to get to this point.
Sure, that sounds like a good place to start. Yeah, this latest ebook came about as it's a successor to a previous work that we did on which was called the Complete Guide to Upgrading Dynamics NAV. And that book really dealt with what we sometimes think about as your last major upgrade. I think as everybody in the NAV community knows, Microsoft made a major shift about 3 years ago now from releasing a new major version of NAV every, say, 2 to 3 years to committing to an annual release path. So now, ever since 2013, there have been new versions every single year. So starting with 2013, then there was 2013 R2, which is also known as NAV 2014, and then NAV 2015, 2016, and now, as of last week, NAV 2017. And the significance is that moving from in the old, what we might call the legacy NAV world, upgrades were much more complicated. They were much more onerous undertakings, especially insofar as a customer may have had customizations involved. Each new version of NAV was involved a significant extent of changes, and so it wasn't as simple as processing a technical upgrade and having everything sort of magically get updated to the latest version. Any customer who's been through an upgrade knows that upgrading can be complicated. And so we wrote the first book to help customers who were stuck on an old version of NAV, anything pre-2013, and wondering, how do I make this leap up to the newest version of NAV? Because there were some interesting choices around that. Do we actually go through the technical upgrade process, or do we do something like a re-implementation, which can often be less costly, less time consuming than an upgrade itself? But now, if you fast forward a couple of years, we're in a completely different world where there's a new version of NAV every year. They're far more incremental in terms of the degree of difference between versions, and Microsoft has more or less committed to keeping things relatively consistent, so that a customer can be fairly assured that Microsoft isn't going to release a new version of NAV that is fundamentally different than its predecessor, requiring a ton of time and money to get updated. So we wrote this new book for customers who are on 2013 R2 or later, who are more interested in getting onto a roadmap, an upgrade path that keeps them consistent or keeps them from falling too far behind from Microsoft's release path.
And as I understand it, a major component of that approach, at least as Microsoft designed it, was using cumulative updates and really being, I guess, committed as a customer to investing in whatever way, internally or with your partner, to sort of on a pretty frequent basis start applying these cumulative updates in order to, well, I guess, I don't know if you'd put it this way, but avoid some of those problems of the past, and also avoid falling behind in a way that's going to hurt you when you do have to catch up. Is that fair to say?
I think that is fair to say. Cumulative updates replaced hot fixes and service packs, which were the previous mechanism for keeping NAV up to date in between versions. Very familiar to anyone who uses pretty much any aspect of the Microsoft platform. But cumulative updates are a little different because they're bundles of functionality, and it used to be that before you couldn't just if you had applied some updates but not others, or some service packs but not others, that didn't mean that your nav system was up to date. It meant that you had addressed some issues that had presented themselves, and usually in response to problems that you were experiencing. So as a partner, for example, in the legacy nav model, when we received a trouble call from a customer saying they were experiencing some difficulty or some errors or some problems with nav, the first things that we would do is we would go looking for a hot fix or a service pack or an update that was targeted specifically at that resolution. And if we found one, which was very often, we would apply it.
So you were saying that when you're trying to fix a customer's issue, you could apply one patch or one fix, but you never really knew if you were fixing all of the potential issues on their system.
Yeah, that's right. So in the legacy model, applying an update, a hot fix, a service pack. A service pack was more of a bundle, but certainly hot fixes and updates were very much more targeted at specific issues. So we were often applying one, or a customer would be applying one in response to a specific problem or a specific change that they needed to make in the system. But if you fast forward to today, where we have cumulative updates, a cumulative update is a bundle of all of the fixes, all the hot fixes, all of the updates, all of the enhancements that Microsoft has made available for the nav platform up until that date. And there's a new cumulative update every month. They're very well documented. And so if a customer keeps up to date with cumulative updates, or at least doesn't fall too far behind, what that means effectively is that when Microsoft releases a new version of nav, that the delta is much smaller between what they're running and what they'll be upgrading to. So at least in theory, the upgrade itself should be more straightforward, quite a bit less disruptive. And we've seen in our own business recently that there's at least the potential to automate upgrades 100% through PowerShell scripts, which is something that we haven't been able to do before.
So in that case where you're asking customers to really, it sounds like take a different way of thinking about their upgrade, about their maintenance or the way they update their system. Is it still a leap to go from, let's say, 2016 to 2017, or is that almost as small as applying another cumulative update?
The answer is that it depends. Mostly, yes, it's a much smaller leap. The upgrades are much more straightforward than they used to be. There are a whole bunch of new tools available for upgrading, and because you're not moving necessarily from across a couple versions, closing a smaller gap, and it should be much more straightforward. That said, the extent of customizations will have a significant impact on the upgrade itself. Many of those customizations will upgrade in a fairly straightforward way, but you can only really know by doing a proper merge analysis and looking at the extent to which core nav objects have been modified. So that part is still the same.
Okay, that makes sense. And is it that same issue with if you have customization or ISV solutions added on top of core NAV, let's say 2016, or I guess even any earlier version, that's sort of in this cumulative update era. Is that a concern of users if they say they have these things on top of nav, that they're saying, well, every time I try to do an update, I'm sort of do they feel like they're like pulling the trigger and finding out if maybe this is the time when their solution or their customization is going to break, or is it really not that impactful in most cases?
Well, I mean, as always, NAV's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness, arguably, that being its flexibility and the ability to develop very powerful customizations, either customer-specific or ISV capabilities. So on the one hand, customers have always loved NAV because of that capability. On the other hand, maintaining your customizations is completely up to you as the customer, and Microsoft can only do so much to make sure that your customizations port between versions. There are certainly some practices that developers can follow in terms of how they build customizations to make sure that they upgrade as easily as possible. And certainly, as a partner who has looked at customizations developed by customers themselves or by a variety of other developers in the market, there's a huge spectrum of approaches out there. Some are maintainable and some are not. And I think it's probably far beyond my personal scope and the scope of the discussion to kind of get into what those development practices are. But there certainly are some practices that can be followed to make sure that customizations do upgrade more smoothly. And what's even more exciting is that some of the new tools, events and extensions, which are available from Microsoft now as part of NAV 2017, there are some ways to build customizations, new customizations, that is, that don't require messing with underlying NAV objects, which means that you can keep the core of NAV preserved and isolated and therefore upgradable, and then apply customizations after the fact. So certainly on a go-forward basis, it's in the interest of customers to really reevaluate the way their customizations are developed to make sure that they're in alignment with Microsoft's vision and therefore to keep their system optimized from an upgrade point of view.
Yeah, and I'd just add, I mean, everything I'm reading or hearing from NAV developers and system solution architects who've been diving into some of those new models, they're pretty excited about it. I mean, I think they acknowledge it's a shift, but it's one that's for the better of the solutions that customers own.
Absolutely.
Maybe to that same point. Okay, so and kind of, I guess, getting back to the cumulative update process. I mean, you talked about some of the benefits that they can be highly automated, that they can be rolled out with not too much, maybe not too much fuss or not too much impact on a company systems. Can you talk a little more about that? If like what it really takes, if you think of like some good clients of Catapult that are really have bought into this approach and are keeping their systems healthy and sort of regularly updated, and maybe even what that means. Because I know you don't have to do every single cumulative update, right? You can maybe go with slightly fewer than that. Can you talk a little more about what that picture looks like?
Yeah, so there's a new cumulative update pretty much every month, and they address technical problems, so bug fixing. They add localization support for various features, and they add new features as well. So each one's different. And another major category that they address is security. With NAV, like many other systems, being exposed to the internet more than ever before, pretty much 100% of the time, either through mobile access or maybe you're running NAV in a cloud environment. There are just so many security vulnerabilities that could present themselves, and so Microsoft is extremely vigilant about testing for those and making sure that any vulnerability is patched quickly. And so, if for no other reason, certainly functionality always comes into play when you're thinking about an upgrade. What new features will we get? But when you're thinking about cumulative updates, I think risk management is probably a better lens to look at them through. It's really not worth it to take chances with your most sensitive corporate data. And so the easiest thing that you can do, most cost-effective thing you can do is make sure that it's up to date from a security point of view. It's like updating your virus definitions on your desktop software, which happens pretty much in the background automatically these days. But applying cumulative updates is relatively straightforward. There's a bit of process to it. It should be probably done in on a test or development database before being rolled out to your production environment, because again, a cumulative update is a change to underlying NAV objects in the database, and it could affect customization. So always good to follow best practices, roll it out, and have a dev environment that mirrors your production environment. Roll out the cumulative update in that environment first, do some testing before pushing it out to production. I agree with your comment earlier. Certainly applying every single one is probably not required. We suggest to our clients that at least staying on top of every second one, or not falling behind by more than 2 or 3 is probably a good idea, simply because you reduce the chances for running into expensive break fix kinds of situations. Because again, back to that issue of hot fixes and bug fixes within NAV, if we get a trouble call from a client who's experiencing an error, the first thing we'll do is go to the Microsoft Dynamics NAV team blog, review the notes associated with each cumulative update, and see if the issue that has been identified or the issue that has been raised by the client is addressed with a cumulative update. And if we find a resolution, of course, the first thing we're going to do is apply that cumulative update. So again, doing that's no problem, but we're doing that in a reactive mode, which is always costing money from the client's perspective. So staying on top of it and just keeping up to date reduces the potential for expensive break fix.
Yeah, I mean, how do you suggest that companies do sort of keep themselves on an ongoing, like I said, commitment to doing those cumulative updates. If you're working with a partner, is it best that there's sort of an understanding just ongoing that the partner will kind of be watching for these and help you apply them? Is that a common way of doing it, and it's just sort of an ongoing maintenance task? Or is it more of a, I mean, I know you said there's some testing involved, so is it more of a case by case sort of mini task or mini project?
Yeah, no, I think the more programmatic and structured it can be, the better. I think of it like the maintenance schedule on my car. Depending on the mileage, I have to. I'm advised to bring it into the dealer service where, a certain schedule of tasks are performed to keep it optimized. And applying cumulative updates is really no different than that. I probably couldn't speak to whether partners have evolved proactive service offerings to help their customers keep them up to date. I would say in general, applying cumulative updates is beyond the scope of most customers. Certainly the ones we deal with may have some expertise internally, but typically rely on us as their partner most of the time to address development level or database level changes and manage the rollout of changes to their production environment. So as a partner, we've been on top of this and are working with our clients to establish set scheduled cumulative update rollouts rather than doing it on a reactive basis when problems come up. And certainly I think that more partners will continue to do that as time goes on. It just makes sense. And then the other thing to note is that these cumulative updates, and in fact these incremental upgrades, these incremental annual upgrades that Microsoft is rolling out, this is just a mirror image of what you see happening automatically in the cloud. So as enterprise software moves more and more towards a SaaS cloud world, where essentially the application is rolled out in a multi-tenant environment, updates are happening behind the scenes. Upgrades are happening behind the scenes. Customers are given a window of time to test their customizations and accept the changes before they're rolled out. But really what Microsoft is doing is they're saying, hey, look, if you're on premise still, or if you're managing your own NAV implementation on cloud servers, which is still the case for the vast majority of NAV customers, we're going to make it easier for you to keep things up to date. And that's what you would experience, and that's what you already are experiencing if you are running Office 365 or CRM Online and eventually Dynamics 365 as well.
Yeah, and that's a great point to raise with the most recent release, because I think now 2017, which I think it came out just a week and a half ago, or maybe on the 27th or 28th of October, and we're recording this
November 7th.
Yeah, November 7th, right? Even with that amount of time that this has been out, this release has been out, I think it's an important one for maybe changing the way that, well, I think maybe partners are the ones who are looking at it most closely now, but now 2017 really will change the way that existing customers that do get upgraded to it eventually, how they approach their system going forward. It's changing. Well, what are some of the biggest changes, right? There's the you touched on it earlier, but it's the the new customization framework, which isn't going to cut away from the old one, right? You can continue to work in the old framework, but it's really presenting a new one with new advantages, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that raises it's a huge opportunity for customers, but it's also a danger as well, because customers are not typically involved in making architectural choices about how customizations are made to their system. Usually, even speaking as a partner, we will make recommendations and build specifications to meet customers' needs, and certainly work through them on the basis of functionality and an understanding of how much things will cost. But customers typically don't get too involved in the architectural choices that we make, and they trust us to make the best choices and to build customizations in a way that are going to be sustainable. And to advise them if we're doing anything that might be throwaway. And that does happen. We have been asked to build capabilities, knowing with the customer knowing full well that when NAV a new version is out, that functionality may become standard, or that that customization may not be sustainable. It does happen. So I think it's really important for customers going forward to educate themselves to some degree about upgrade technology, about the different tools available. And essentially there's three ways to build customizations in NAV now. You can actually modify NAV objects and and write new code in the core of your nav system, the way we always have. That still exists, and to some degree, that's that's not a bad thing to do, as long as it's done properly. And there are better tools now for doing your merge analysis between versions that are more contextual and help developers upgrade those kinds of customizations. But more and more, what we expect is to be able to handle customers' custom functionality requirements through events and extensions, which are new. They were released in NAV 2016, not quite fully baked, I would say. In NAV 2017, we're expecting to see a bit more robust functionality available to us as developers. So as a customer, I think it's important to at least ask the question of your partner, how are you going to approach this customization? Is it going to be sustainable? Can we achieve this using the eventing model? Can we build it as an extension? What will we face when it comes time to upgrade?
Yeah, I mean, that seems like it really ought to be the first question. If you're either a new customer looking to add on to NAV 2017, or I can't imagine anyone's upgrading just yet. Although I don't know, maybe there's perhaps a TAP program, and maybe there are some. But
yeah,
if you are looking down the road anyway to upgrade, the question of can we do it in extensions first seems to be the right question from everything I've heard so far. Not to say that, like, maybe to your point, it's not the only way, but it's probably that's where Microsoft's going to invest, right?
Not only that, but ISVs. I would expect that as ISVs evolve their roadmaps, that they will take advantage of events and extensions quite a bit more. And in fact, it would make sense to me as an ISV that's how I would build my software, because keeping my software in alignment with Microsoft's with the NAV roadmap and the latest NAV version has always been difficult. And sometimes we see customers who want to upgrade but who can't upgrade because they depend on an ISV who hasn't got a version of their software that's fully tested and compliant with the latest NAV release yet.
In the new ebook, you mentioned at one point that NAV has never been more dependent on the outside world. I think speaking about 2017, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Earlier I talked about the security aspects and the NAV being exposed to the internet. It's probably not just NAV that this is true about. It's probably true of other enterprise software as well. But we live in a much more connected world. That goes without saying. ERP systems of 10 or 20 years ago essentially functioned as or existed as black boxes with respect to the outside world. They were secure data stores that operated within a company's secure firewalls. The only way data got in or out was either through manual data entry or potentially batch import of files, and data got out through reports and maybe through mechanisms like EDI to the extent that it was exchanged with the outside world. But now through web services, as a primary example, building integrations to systems like NAV, almost 100% of NAV is available to be data can be exchanged through web services for custom application purposes across the Microsoft platform, as well as building extensions to Office 365, building extensions and connections with Dynamics CRM as well, which are cloud services. So these are, regardless of where you run NAV, Dynamics CRM Online runs in the cloud on Microsoft's data centers. Same with Office 365. Maybe you have third-party applications as well that provide line of business functionality that are running in the cloud. So you're exchanging data with them. You have mobile users or web client users who are accessing NAV from outside the corporate firewall, potentially on a variety of different devices. So really the point is that NAV doesn't exist in a protected envelope anymore. It's in fact, in order for it to do its job, in order for customers to get the value out of it, they really have to take advantage of all of these potential connections with other technology services and platforms.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I don't disagree. I would think that as the product evolves, as it gets to 2018, 2019, I would be less surprised if we saw, for example, partnerships with other services that can be very nicely plugged in very seamless ways to the core product that already exists rather than seeing a lot of new functionality in the core product. That's just my own personal, but I think it gets to that idea that e-services or different kinds of robust integrations are kind of where the R&D team seems to be putting a lot of value.
Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely.
Okay, and is there anything else you would share about what you are hearing from, your clients today in terms of sort of where they're, to the extent that they are sort of paying attention to Microsoft's roadmap, some of the other products that are relevant to NAV right now? I mean, in particular, I would think of, there's a range of them, right, between Office 365, Power BI, Power Apps, even. I don't know.
I think, the biggest thing that we're hearing, both explicitly and implicitly is that, because Microsoft has done such a good job of evolving the capabilities around NAV, and you've just mentioned a few of them, Power Apps, Power BI, Office 365, CRM Online, there's just so much now in terms of other capabilities that make NAV more powerful, and customers want access to this functionality. So it's not no longer sufficient just to focus on the ERP platform itself, but customers want to do these other things and take advantage of other aspects of the Microsoft platform. But to do that, they need to be relatively current on the version of NAV that they're running, because some of these capabilities are dependent on what version. If you're running NAV 2013, it may not support some of the things that we've just described, or integrations may not be as evolved as they are in the latest versions. So, again, from a recommendation standpoint, we feel it's really important for customers to keep as current as possible. And that doesn't mean always running the latest version. That is just not practical. We recognize that most customers will always be behind by a version or two. It also doesn't mean upgrading to every version. It means you could potentially skip a version. But we really think it is important that customers reframe their thinking about upgrades altogether. Upgrades used to be something that you avoided at all costs. They were like your original implementation, disruptive, costly, and also they didn't have a reputation for adding a lot of value. You would get through an upgrade and be running the latest version and have a more stable system, but in terms of business impact or more functionality, more capabilities, more productivity, they didn't always deliver. And so I think we're finally starting to see the potential for upgrades to deliver value, or for the not just upgrades, but for staying updated and keeping NAV future-proof, to use the title of our book, as a key mechanism for getting all that you can out of your investment in the ERP system and in the ecosystem that exists around it.
Right, and I'd have to agree. It does. It seems like it's going to be a bit of a shift in thinking, one that's probably been brewing for at least a couple of years now,
For sure.
for customers to accept that, huh?
Yeah, absolutely, and there's still some resistance. We still have to. One of the challenges is getting customers up to a certain level where the upgrades do become easy, and part of that is getting up to the current state. And so a lot of customers went through that last upgrade from a legacy version like NAV 5, NAV 7, NAV 2009 to 2013 R2, and so now they're ready. But now we're seeing there's a bunch of customers out there running NAV 2013 R2 who haven't gotten up to 2016 or 2017. So what I would expect to happen probably in the next 2 to 3 years is we'll see most of those customers who are running pre-NAV 2013 R2 versions get up to date on 2017, and we'll see more customers who are on R2, 2013 R2 also get up to date. So I would expect to see a lot of catch up in the next 2 to 3 years, and then once we're caught up, and once the customer base is largely caught up, I think it becomes much easier to contemplate this sort of incremental upgrade mindset. Yeah,
it's funny. You think about, okay, so a couple of years to get up to date in terms of sort of the late 2016 state of things, and this is no fault of anybody. It's just the speed at which companies have to work to get them. And then where are we going to be? Where's Microsoft going to be in 2 years?
Yeah, who knows?
Hard to guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, certainly one thing we're starting to get ready for is Dynamics 365, and the question that we're asking, even as a partner, is what's the roadmap for an on-prem customer who's committed to an annual upgrade path. Are they on that path forever? Or do they eventually make a choice to move off of their on-prem annual upgrade, cumulative update world and into the cloud? And I still think that's probably several years away yet. Not a concern that most customers have to grapple with. Certainly something we don't have a lot of information about, but that I think that's the ultimate question, really.
I agree completely. I think Microsoft will continue to try to work toward a set of tools and a platform that they can hold up to existing NAV customers, like you said, somewhere in the future, and say, look, it makes this much more sense now to be on our cloud, enjoying these regular updates, and here's how much less pain and less cost it'll have for you. And I think over time they'll try to, and they'll be able to make that case. I think it'll take some more time, but yeah, for sure, that's the way things are going.
Yeah, no doubt about it. We've seen it with CRM Online as well, right? As a partner on the CRM side too, bit by bit, every single CRM on-premise customer eventually chooses to migrate to online because it's just a more consistent, stable platform.
Yeah, that's been several years in the making at this point. I'm sure it's still somewhat ongoing, but it's interesting to hear from your side of things that that's the way the customers are going. All right, well, Elliot, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us today. It's been fun. Congratulations on the new ebook.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, always. This has been another edition of the MSDW podcast. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to be on the podcast, maybe you're an ISV with a product release, a consultant with a case study, or a bar with a unique slant on the Microsoft Dynamics product ecosystem, please drop us a line. You can reach me, Jason Gumpert, at jagumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. Until next time, we're MS Dynamics World signing off.